June 6, 1944, in the humid expanse of the Sulu Sea near Tawi-Tawi, Commander Samuel Dealey peered through the periscope of USS Harder, searching for movement among the Japanese convoy routes that laced the archipelago. The water was calm, but the danger was alive. Pulsing through every sonar ping and coded radio message from other submarines warning of destroyer patrols designed to crush American undersea operations without mercy or hesitation. This was not a battleground of glory but of shadows and sudden death, where one mistaken maneuver could doom an entire crew in silence. Dealey knew the risks as well as any captain in the Pacific Fleet, yet his instincts were never cautious nor conventional, forged instead through months of frontline patrols where aggression often meant survival against skilled enemy hunters.
He had studied the way Japanese destroyers reacted when submarines were cornered, recognizing patterns of pursuit that Japanese commanders assumed would force American boats to flee or dive into deep water, abandoning the fight completely. From that observation, Dealey conceived something radical, something no manual had suggested and no admiral had endorsed, something that made his crew question his sanity, but trust his record.
When USS Harder's sonar identified the sound of propellers slicing toward their position, Dealey did not shout for a crash dive or silent running, but ordered full speed ahead directly toward the threat, shocking even his battle-trained officers. It was a move unthinkable in Navy doctrine, a head-on charge at the ship most capable of destroying them. Yet in this madness was a calculated gamble based not on torpedoes alone, but on human psychology at its breaking point. Japanese destroyer captains, conditioned to chase fleeing submarines, were suddenly forced to react to an attack that violated every expectation they held. The bow of USS Harder sliced forward like a dagger, its crew working with eerie precision as Dealey locked in a firing solution that would define not only their lives, but the future of submarine warfare. Before that day was over, Navy records would be shattered, confidence in old tactics shaken, and a new method of survival would begin spreading silently throughout the Pacific, carried not by official channels, but by captains who whispered the name Harder with disbelief and admiration. The waters of Tawi-Tawi would never be forgotten by those who survived their deadly lessons. Commander Samuel Dealey was no stranger to danger, and by 1944, his name carried a reputation that unsettled both allies and enemies, forged through patrols that defied conventional wisdom and pushed submarine warfare into new psychological territory. Born in Dallas, Texas, Dealey carried a calm yet unyielding confidence into the U.S. Naval Academy, where instructors noted his balance of discipline and daring long before the war turned his instincts into weapons. When the Pacific became America's primary battleground after Pearl Harbor, Dealey's command skills sharpened quickly, earning respect from crews who saw in him a leader unafraid to risk everything if it meant striking a decisive blow. Harder's early war patrols revealed Dealey's pattern of calculated aggression, where obedience to orders never overshadowed his belief in bold initiative, especially when enemy routines could be disrupted or destroyed entirely. He drilled his crew not just for survival but domination, believing that submarines could become hunters instead of prey even against destroyers equipped with superior speed and sonar. His radio transmissions back to Pearl Harbor were brief, efficient, and often understated. Yet beneath the surface lay victories that changed how submariners viewed their role in the vast ocean war. Dealey's mantra was simple: anticipate the enemy's fear and strike before they know they are vulnerable. Harder's crew soon began referring to their commander with a mix of awe and anxiety, knowing he could lead them into extreme danger with only seconds' notice, trusting their training and instincts to complete the mission. Though never reckless for glory, Dealey accepted risks that other captains avoided, creating tension between tactical rules and battlefield experience that would eventually reshape official doctrine. Many called him defiant, and perhaps he was, but it was a defiance grounded in results that earned him the Navy Cross, the nickname Destroyer Killer, and the grudging admiration of even those who questioned his methods. By early 1944, Dealey's growing legend echoed through submarine tender ships and mess halls from Fremantle to Midway, inspiring younger captains who saw in him not just a warrior, but a teacher of instinctive command. His refusal to accept conventional limitations would soon face its ultimate test at Tawi-Tawi, where the true power of his unorthodox tactics would emerge in fire, steel, and shattered expectations, altering the very psychology of Pacific naval combat. USS Harder, SS-257, was no ordinary submarine, and by the time she reached the Pacific, she had already been shaped into one of the most lethal predators in the American fleet, built not merely for stealth, but for speed, maneuverability, and sheer audacity. Launched in November 1942 as a Gato-class submarine, Harder carried the DNA of machines designed to operate across immense distances, run silent beneath enemy waters, and strike with torpedoes that could breach even the toughest steel hulls. But what set Harder apart was not her armament alone. It was the way she would be commanded. Harder was 301 feet of hardened steel, powered by 4 Fairbanks Morse diesel engines that allowed her to sprint on the surface and glide quietly below, using electric motors for silent approach, making her as dangerous stalking at periscope depth as she was dashing across moonlit seas. Her 6 forward and 4 aft torpedo tubes gave her captains the confidence to engage threats from any angle. While her sensors and radar allowed her to track ships beyond visual range, something Japanese destroyers often underestimated until it was too late. Inside her pressure hull, the temperature swung from freezing cold in the silent running room to sweltering heat in the engine compartments, yet her crew endured it all, bonded by discipline and the shared knowledge that they were sailing aboard a weapon forged for precise violence. Harder's design emphasized offensive capability, yet her role in the fleet evolved through the spirit of the men who sailed her, especially under Commander Dealey's command, which turned her from a hunter of cargo ships into a destroyer assassin. Her hull bore the scars of mine dodging and depth charge barrages, yet each patrol added new victory flags. Each patrol tested new theories of evasion and attack, and each success reinforced the belief that this submarine was destined for more than routine warfare. She became a symbol of what American submarines could achieve when strategy, skill, and daring merged flawlessly. By early 1944, USS Harder had already sunk enemy transports and tankers, but her greatest legacy was still ahead, waiting in the waters of the Philippines, where she would prove that even a submarine could shatter the backbone of a fleet. Her mission was no longer mere destruction. It was transformation, reshaping not just tactics, but the very psychology of naval warfare. Traditional submarine doctrine in World War II emphasized silence, patience, and shadow-like movement beneath the waves, where a steel leviathan could strike unseen and slip away without ever revealing its position. Manuals repeated the same warning: never attack a destroyer head-on, never surface near a hunter-killer vessel, and under no circumstances remain in the path of an armed ship intent on flushing you out. But Samuel Dealey, commanding officer of USS Harder, rewrote the rulebook in 4 days of sea combat that would change naval strategy forever. The down-the-throat attack, as it later became known, flipped naval logic on its narrative and wagered everything on the idea that a destroyer captain expected retreat, not confrontation. The tactic involved charging directly at an oncoming destroyer, bow first at high speed, sacrificing evasive maneuvers for a straight-line approach that would ideally align the submarine's bow with the destroyer's keel. From this position, the submarine could fire torpedoes head-on, shrinking the enemy ship's ability to dodge and using its forward momentum against it. Conventional thought viewed this as suicide. A destroyer, built for speed and armed with depth charges and sonar, should have had every advantage in an open-water duel. Yet Dealey recognized something deeper about human instinct in warfare. In the split seconds of engagement, distance meant certainty, and closing rapidly meant chaos. Japanese destroyer commanders, trained to trap submarines beneath the surface, hesitated when confronted with a charging sub. Their guns were not calibrated for such angles. Depth charges were useless at close range, and inertia betrayed them when a torpedo was fired straight into their narrowing path. The hesitation was just long enough for 1, 2, sometimes 3 American torpedoes to find their mark before the destroyer could respond with fatal force. By rejecting established doctrine in favor of psychological disruption, Dealey demonstrated that naval combat was not purely mechanical, but deeply human, governed as much by fear and confusion as by steel and firepower. The down-the-throat attack wasn't merely a tactic. It was a declaration that ingenuity could upend even the deadliest of odds, and that sometimes the boldest move was not to hide, but to dare. Dawn broke over the Sulu Sea on June 6, 1944, as USS Harder lay silently beneath the rolling waves, her periscope raised to scan the horizon. Commander Samuel Dealey, calm and calculating, spotted the first target, a Japanese destroyer identified as IJN Minazuki, a vessel armed with depth charges, high-speed engines, and a seasoned crew trained to hunt submarines. Under conventional doctrine, the Harder should have slipped deeper, avoided contact, and waited for a safer moment. But this was not a conventional captain, and the ocean was no longer a conventional battlefield. Dealey ordered flank speed, driving the submarine toward the destroyer instead of away from it, astonishing the crew and shattering every lesson drilled into them at New London. The tension inside Harder was palpable as the crew struggled to align the forward tubes, knowing that one mistake could mean their steel coffin would never surface again. The Japanese destroyer accelerated, its gun crews rushing to stations, shocked to see a submarine willingly closing distance. This was not a hunted whale retreating into the abyss. This was a wolf charging a spear's tip. At precisely 100 yards, Dealey gave the order, "Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. 3 Mark 18 torpedoes surged toward the destroyer's bow in a tight spread, each capable of tearing through armor and igniting fuel or munitions beneath the decks. The Minazuki's captain reacted, ordering a hard turn to starboard, attempting to outrun the torpedoes or force them to detonate in open water. But the distance was too short, and the hesitation was fatal. The first torpedo struck the midsection of the ship with a blast that echoed through the water column, followed moments later by a second detonation that ripped open her hull and sent seawater flooding into the engine room. The Minazuki rolled, smoke pouring from her shattered bridge, and within minutes she slid beneath the sea, dragged down by explosive force and gravity's pull. The impossible had been done. An American submarine had sunk a destroyer in a direct attack. The effect was more than tactical, it was psychological. Harder's crew erupted into disbelief and triumph, but Dealey remained steady, already scanning the horizon for the next target. In 4 days he would find 4 more, and with each sinking, the Navy would begin to realize this was not madness, but a new kind of warfare, one defined by audacity, precision, and the terrifying courage to charge straight into danger. Between June 6th and June 9th, 1944, the waters surrounding Tawi-Tawi and Dassol Bay witnessed an unprecedented reversal of naval roles as the hunter became the hunted and Commander Samuel Dealey, as USS Harder began to carve a ruthless path through the Japanese destroyer line. While Allied command hesitated to approve unconventional tactics, Dealey demonstrated that aggression, precision, and psychological pressure could rival firepower, leading a torpedo assault campaign no other submarine dared to attempt in the Pacific War. Dealey's first victory over Minazuki sent shockwaves through the Imperial Japanese Navy, yet what followed was even more disruptive to their destroyer fleet, breaking confidence in their so-called submarine sweep formations and sowing chaos in the ranks of officers trained to expect passive American withdrawal. Harder's sonar detected a second destroyer, the Hayanami, on June 7th, as it moved in tight escort pattern with several transports, confident that shallow waters and coordinated turn patterns would shield its vulnerable stern. At dawn, Dealey again chose confrontation over concealment, ordering a surface-level approach, letting the enemy believe he was retreating, before diving into a surprise torpedo run beneath their outer arc, anticipating their turning radius by mere seconds, and releasing a four-spread attack at point-blank range, which left Hayanami shredded and aflame before she broke apart under the waves, her boilers erupting in violent bursts audible miles away. On June 8th, USS Harder struck again, intercepting a third destroyer, the Tanikaze, en route from Singapore, using deeper, colder water temperature layers to mask movement, before executing another frontal attack, destroying Tanikaze without giving her sonar operator time to process the contact signature or deploy evasive depth charges, a feat later deemed miraculous by post-war Japanese analysts. The fourth day, found Dealey hunting near Dassault Bay, where USS Harder sank another destroyer later identified as Matsui, using a mixed torpedo salvo of magnetic and contact detonators, compensating for shallow draft and turbulent surface waves to ensure hull-shattering impact beneath the keel. By June 9th, the toll was unmistakable. 4 Japanese destroyers had been sunk in rapid succession, with a 5th crippled, and run aground to prevent capsizing, leaving Imperial Navy Command stunned, unable to explain the sudden collapse in their anti-submarine operations across Luzon Strait. Dealey had not just broken doctrine, he had broken rhythm, using time, distance, and relentless pressure to overload the Japanese decision cycle, proving that in war, the deadliest weapon was not always steel, but certainty replaced by fear. News of USS Harder's extraordinary assault spread not through official communiques or after-action reports, but through the whispered circuits of wardrooms and mess decks, where submarine skippers gathered over lukewarm coffee and chart tables, trading details like forbidden scripture. Commanders who had once memorized tactical manuals now found themselves underlining Dealey's name in patrol reports, studying every sonar trace, and torpedoes spread as if reading the margins of a new gospel of submarine warfare. What Harder had done in 4 days could not be dismissed as luck. It was a challenge to every captain operating beneath the Pacific's sunlit waves. In Fremantle, Pearl Harbor, and Brisbane, it was not senior admirals who embraced the tactic first, but the lieutenants and watch officers, the men who had seen comrades lost to depth charges and aerial strafing, who recognized the value of a method that upended the predator-prey equation. New conversations began in cramped radio rooms, as officers scribbled torpedo angles on envelopes and tested Dealey's down-the-throat doctrine against their own patrol logs, noting that the Japanese destroyer fleet, drilled to expect retreat, faltered when obligated to react in seconds rather than minutes. Official manuals still warned against frontal torpedo attacks, highlighting bow angles and limited escape vectors, yet unofficially, the Pacific Fleet's culture began to shift. Experienced skippers like O'Kane of USS Tang and Morton of USS Wahoo quietly adopted modified aggression techniques, hitting convoys at unexpected angles, or attacking even when numerical superiority favored the enemy. The submarine force had always been a brotherhood of quiet professionals, but now its conversations carried a sharper tone. A belief that audacity, carefully timed, could preserve more lives than caution ever had. By July 1944, subtle ripples became visible in operational reports. A rise in forward-firing torpedo shots, an increase in successful enemy destroyer kills, a pattern of taking the initiative near narrow straits and coastal choke points. Like an unspoken code, Dealey's doctrine traveled from captain to captain, beneath the desks of admirals who would only recognize its value after the war. USS Harder's legacy was already reshaping the Pacific battlefield, not through orders, but through action, proving once again that in the crucible of war, innovation was rarely born in classrooms, but in the silent, steel-shadowed depths where instinct met opportunity and hesitation meant death. Within the Imperial Japanese Navy, the rising toll of destroyed destroyers triggered a growing sense of confusion and outrage, as commander after commander reported engagements that defied every established rule of submarine warfare. Officers who had trained in Yokosuka and Itajima insisted that American submarines were predictable, slow to attack, quick to submerge, and bound to hit-and-run tactics that favored distance over confrontation. Yet the sinking of Minazuki, Hayanami, Tanikaze, and others in rapid succession suggested something far more unsettling. The enemy had stopped behaving like prey. Post-action interrogation logs and intelligence briefings revealed a thread of disbelief. How could an American submarine willingly approach torpedo range head-on, exposing its bow and sacrificing precious seconds to fire in a narrow cone? Japanese destroyer captains, trained for wide-arc engagements and reactive depth charge patterns, assumed submarines sought escape, not confrontation. Their sonar operators expected evasive echoes, not incoming torpedoes at point blank. Their assumptions had become their undoing. Rear Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, overseeing the Tawi fleet, described the new American offensive as tactically insane, yet tactically brilliant, noting that what appeared rash was actually based on a calculated reading of human behavior under pressure. Japanese officers later admitted their greatest weakness was not inferior weaponry or training, but the failure to adapt their expectations. Their doctrine relied on intimidation. Their confidence rested in destroyer superiority. When American submarines charged instead of fled, the psychological advantage flipped completely. The term kubiuchi, a beheading strike, began circulating among younger officers, who realized too late that their destroyer formations, designed to catch submarines in spread nets, were now tight traps into which Dealey and others fired torpedoes with surgical aggression. Few captains had the nerve to break their own formation, turn inward, and ram or fire depth charges immediately. And when they hesitated, even for 7 seconds, the Harder made its kill. In war diaries recovered after 1945, several Japanese naval officers confessed an uncomfortable truth. What terrified them most was not the torpedo, but the American willingness to ignore fear, rewriting the rules before they had time to understand them. The ocean had become unpredictable, and with each lost destroyer, so too sank the illusion of mastery Japan once held over its hunted foes beneath the sea. Word of Dealey's audacity did not travel through official channels, but across wardrooms, engine rooms, and submarine mess tables, where captains compared scars and tradecraft quietly. Men traded details in low voices, sketching attack arcs on scrap paper and muttering about timing, lead angles, and the subtle psychology of forcing hesitation within enemy bridge crews. The story of Harder's frontal runs moved faster than formal doctrine could change, carried by crews who trusted experience over regulation and who believed that the best lessons were those learned at sea under fire. Junior officers copied Dealey's firing solutions, adapting torpedo spreads to local conditions and teaching them during night watches beneath the hum of diesel engines and radar monitors. Lieutenants on other boats practiced simulated head-on runs in shallow training areas, timing turns and rehearsing emergency crash dives that allowed survivable margins after a frontal salvo. Commanding officers who had once dismissed the tactic as foolhardy began to accept its logic when patrol reports recorded successful kills and returned boats came home with fewer casualties than those avoiding direct confrontation entirely. By midsummer, informal networks solidified into tacit doctrine within patrol squadrons, as veteran captains mentored newcomers in quiet briefings on deck. The tactic spread because it worked, and because submarine crews controlled their own survival through initiative rather than rigid obedience to doctrine. Admiralty branches took notice only after compiled patrol returns revealed a statistical uptick in destroyer sinkings linked to head-on engagements, at which point formal manuals were amended slowly, reluctantly, and with careful caveats about risk management and fire control. The spread of Dealey's method is a lesson about how warfare evolves, through imitation of success, rapid adaptation by practitioners, and an almost instinctive transfer of knowledge among those who share danger and duty. It shows that battlefield innovation often originates not in halls of command, but within the cramped watch-lit places where sailors argue test and ultimately accept the hard truth that sometimes survival demands breaking the rules that once kept men alive. Commander Samuel Dealey's lethal choreography beneath the Pacific waves did more than sink destroyers. It rewrote the psychology and tactics of submarine warfare, establishing a bold blueprint that still pulses through modern naval strategy. His down-the-throat assault defied the conservative doctrines of his era and proved that submarines were not merely hunters of opportunity, but predators capable of seizing initiative, even when facing superior firepower. What began as one man's gamble became a watershed moment in undersea combat, where audacity merged with disciplined timing, transforming tactical possibilities in warfare's most unforgiving domain. In the decades that followed, naval academies worldwide studied Dealey's patrols, dissecting his decisions, firing angles, and instinctive reading of enemy behavior. The U.S. Navy's post-war submarine fleet incorporated frontal attack doctrines into training modules, while advancements in sonar, active engagement algorithms, and wire-guided torpedoes drew inspiration from his principle of weaponizing surprise. Fleet commanders eventually recognized that Dealey had embraced a truth long overlooked, that submarines could inflict panic not just by striking unseen, but by daring to be seen and forcing enemy overreaction. In the Cold War, fast attack submarines like the USS Seawolf and later Virginia-class vessels incorporated aggressive engagement profiles into tactical simulations, teaching new generations of officers to think like Dealey, anticipate fear, compel hesitation, and strike before the opponent can even react. His legacy lives on in doctrines emphasizing calculated confrontation, rapid torpedo salvo deployment, and decentralized decision-making, empowering captains to act outside rigid instructions if the opportunity appears. The USS Samuel B. Dealey, DE 1006, commissioned in 1954, became a floating tribute to the man whose instincts reshaped the sea's silent war. But Dealey's legacy is etched not only in steel, but in the stories of lives saved. Submariners who adopted his methods survived patrols once deemed suicidal, proving that innovation is often born in defiance, and that rules punish the predictable. Today, every undersea captain who stares through a periscope owes a debt to the man who risked his boat to teach that sometimes the only way to survive is to charge straight into the storm. In the end, Dealey's legacy is not just victory over enemy hulls, but victory over fear, a reminder that in the darkest waters of war, courage can still redraw the map of history.